Welcome to today's press briefing. We have on the stage two doctors, Dr. Zhang Shukwan, Head of Communicable Disease Branch of the Center for Health Protection, and Dr. Sarah Ho, Chief Manager of the Hospital Authority. The two doctors will give you an update on COVID cases and HA situation. Over to Dr. Zhang. Good afternoon. We recorded altogether 3,417 local PCR positive cases, 3,417 cases, including 1,365 PCR cases and 2,052 RAT positive cases. There are also 257 imported cases, including 251 PCR cases and 6 RAT positive cases. As for death cases, the HA today reported 5 additional cases. Cumulatively, since the fifth wave, we have recorded 9,214 death cases. The HA will give you an update on these cases. At the moment, 1,060 patients are admitted in our facilities, including 137 new cases. As for those requiring isolation, 342 patients are now in isolation wards, 20 patients in second-tier wards, and also 344 patients now in North Lantau Hospital, Hong Kong Infection Control Center. And there are altogether 99 new cases. As for new cases reported yesterday, 3 were in critical condition and 2 were in serious condition. Altogether, among the patients admitted, there are 20 patients in critical condition and 23 in serious condition, and 8 patients in critical condition are receiving care in the intensive care unit. As for new cases, death cases reported, there are 5, including one 74-year-old male who passed away on the 10th of July, and 2 other patients, respectively aged 65 and 82. These 2 female patients passed away yesterday, and also a 73-year-old male and a 90-year-old female who passed away yesterday. They were not residential care home residents. 3 received 2 jabs, 2 received 1 jab, and 2 did not have any vaccination record. They have either chronic underlying illnesses or they were cancer patients. I'll give the floor back to Dr. Zhang. Among the 257 imported cases, 117 were picked up at the airport, 119 were picked up at quarantine hotels, and 21 cases were identified after they've left the quarantine hotels. The majority of them had high CD values. Some had low CD values, but they had community activities. They could be local cases. And we also have countries from which there were many cases, or over 10 imported cases recorded. 74 from UK, 24 from Singapore, 19 from Thailand, 18 from Canada, and 13 from France, and then 11 cases from the Philippines, 11 from the US. As for other cases, we have recorded in less than 10 imported cases. As for residential care home cases, 4 homes have close contacts which would be subject to quarantine. 聖公會林護長者之家, 1 resident tested positive, and 9 persons would be subject to quarantine. For 樂裕苑, 1 resident tested positive. In fact, 2 residents tested positive. And then those in their surrounding, staying in the same home, would be subject to quarantine. The third one, Shuttlecock residential care home with 1 resident testing positive, and 17 others will be subject to quarantine. 香港中國婦利會黃陳淑英紀念護理安老院, 2 residents tested positive, and 10 others will be subject to quarantine. As for schools, today's Thursday, we received 355 reports of positive cases from 292 schools, including 285 students and 70 teachers from 63 kindergartens, from childcare centers, 131 primary schools, 97 secondary schools, and 1 special school. 160 schools recorded over more than 2 positive cases in the past 7 days. and we have recommended the following 4 schools in relation to some of the classes to suspend face-to-face teaching. In Futan, Hong Kong 國際幼稚園 Hong Kong International Kindergarten. For pre-nursery B, there are 19 students in the class and 2 tested positive. So this class will be suspended for a week. 聖公會主峰小學 in Sha Tin Lake Yuen Estate, Class 3B, 6 students tested positive. So this class will be suspended for 1 week. Zhen Dok School in Fushan Road, Diamond Hill, Say Mong, class 4 Mong, and 3 students tested positive. The class will be suspended for a week. And Tonghua Group of Hospitals, Yau Dat Zi Memorial Primary School, Yuen Long, class 4A, there are 20 students and 3 tested positive. This class will also be suspended for 1 week. As for subvariants of Omicron, we received new analysis results. For the suspected BA.2.12.1 cases, there are 62, 43 of which are untraceable cases, and 19 are linked with other cases. For BA.4.5 cases, there are 32 suspected cases, and half of them, that is 16, had linkage with other cases, and 16 others are untraceable. And I'd also like to make an announcement. Starting from today, the government will further enhance the testing arrangements at Shenzhen Bay Port. Apart from the special nucleic acid test service, which allows online booking, passengers must obtain a negative result before they can carry on their journey. Failing that, we would impose a more stringent approach in handling the positive PCR results. In other words, they would be issued an isolation order and would be sent to a community isolation facility immediately. And starting from tomorrow, the government will also require that the confirmed cases under home quarantine wear electronic wristbands whilst observing isolation. That concludes my report. 102 patients recovered as of yesterday, including 82 who were discharged, and also 5 patients have been confirmed via admission screening, and 9 patients sharing the same ward would be listed as close contacts. We have 74 more staffers testing positive, and so far 24,982 have been infected, and we have 16 more staffers returning to their positions. So altogether, 24,562 staffers have recovered and returned to their posts. As for Hong Kong Buddhist Hospital, for the palliative care ward, 1 female patient tested positive of COVID-19 on the 13th of July, and the patient was already transferred to Queen Elizabeth Hospital for isolation treatment. And upon contact tracing, the hospital discovered that there were 6 patients sharing the same ward and 5 other staff members who tested positive. 1 patient suffering from chronic illnesses passed away in the small hours today, and this death count would be included in the figures to be reported tomorrow. As for other patients, they are now in stable condition and they are receiving isolation treatment, and the ward has suspended receiving new patients and suspended visiting arrangements. We've also thoroughly disinfected and cleansed the ward. The hospital will continue to closely monitor the situation, the health condition of their staff, and will also continue to liaise with the Center for Health Protection and keep us up to date. That concludes my report. The floor is open. Please introduce the media organization you represent.
This side. Good afternoon. I'm from Cable TV. Well, today's case load has exceeded 3,000, and some experts also projected that by September there's going to be another outbreak. So I'd like to know from the HA, so have you done any estimate by what time will the system be overloaded? And also, The Secretary for Health said earlier that, for the Leave Home Safe, he'd consider adopting this real name registration. But then, according to the ITIB, there is no plan yet. And they're expecting that by the time when the SIM card has to be registered in real name, then that would in effect become a real name system. So do you have any plans to introduce this real name registration system for the Leave Home Safe app? In fact, you don't need to have a SIM card before you use the Leave Home Safe app. So does it mean that in the future we will have to have a SIM card before we can use the Leave Home Safe app? Well, with regard to the Leave Home Safe app, I think we're considering the details, and once they are available, I'm sure they'll be announced. With regard to the contingency plan of the HA, earlier on, the Secretary also told you that we have already come up with a contingency plan. Well, given our experience in the fifth wave, in terms of manpower and also hardware and also the number of beds and also facilities, we have already put in place contingency measures. And earlier on, we did say that about half of the A&E beds can be turned into designated beds, so that would be able to take in more COVID patients. And also, we have also got this real name list, so that when necessary, within a short space of time, at short notice, we can transfer or deploy people so that they can immediately admit new COVID patients. That's the reason why a couple of weeks ago we did put in place this arrangement, and we already made the announcement. Yes, I'm from TVB. I'd like to follow up. Well, actually, this morning, experts said that by September, there might be another wave of outbreak. And in fact, we are already having a level of 3,000 plus infection per day. So does it mean that we can keep it like that? Or is it that without any serious cases or fatality and so on, we can keep it like that? So when would you expect to have to tighten up the control, or can we maintain the status quo for a while? And also, I'd like to know from the HA with regard to the hospitalization rate, and you said that the situation was somewhat tighter. So are we going to go into the second stage, by which time we will have to adopt more stringent measures? I think the number of infection is rising, and therefore there is no room for us to relax the measures further with regard to social distancing. And I'm sure the current situation would also have an impact on the HA. Well, we'll be monitoring the situation closely, as we said yesterday. The number of confirmed cases, and for those who needed to be hospitalized, it already reached 1,000 or so yesterday, and we can see a rising trend, and therefore we will continue to monitor the situation, and when necessary, we will move into the second stage, whereby the number of beds will be increased in order to admit more patients who need to be hospitalized. Next, that lady. Well, I'm from Now TV. Good afternoon. I'd just like to know that for Shenzhen Bay border control point, and for those who have been confirmed positive, and they will have to be isolated. What about those who were confirmed yesterday? And also, I'd like to clarify one point. You talk about 5 deaths, all had chronic diseases. So I'd like to know what kind of diseases did they have, and also, recently, with regard to the cases during the compulsory testing and also the restricted testing declaration and so on. So there have been more cases detected. So is there a chance that we'd be able to see a drop in the number of cases? Well, that depends on those who have to be isolated, and if home quarantine is not suitable, then of course they would also have to go to the community isolation facilities. Well, the first death was a 19-year-old female, and in fact she fainted on the street, and then some passers-by took her to the A&E department. And then we took a CT scan for her there, and we found out that she was actually suffering from a brain stroke. And after testing, we found out that she was also suffering from COVID. And because her condition was that she was having this brain stroke, and the other one was a 73-year-old male, and he also had this nasal pharyngeal cancer, and also he was also suffering from Parkinson's disease, and he was demented. And also another patient was an 82-year-old female, and he was also having this arrhythmic and cardiac problem, and also hypertension and so on. And another one was a 65-year-old female. She was also suffering from nasopharyngeal cancer and also hypertension. And yesterday she was having nose bleeding because once you contracted nasopharyngeal cancer, because your membrane would be thinner, and therefore it's easy for you to have nose bleeding. And because of the serious nose bleeding, she also passed out. And after testing, she was confirmed positive. And then another 74-year-old male, he also had hypertension, and he was also suffering from obesity. And he also suddenly passed out. And then when he arrived at the A&E department, he was certified dead. And we are now taking follow-up action on this. Next, the gentleman in green. Yes, I'm from AM 730. You talk about the Buddhist hospital ward. So what about the male staff? Can you tell us what he was doing and what's his post? And also you talk about the Shenzhen Bay, and earlier on we had the Sunrise Diagnostics suspected case for the Shenzhen Bay non-positive case. So would that also be applicable to the Shenzhen Bridge? And would you also be designating a special area for those who are not neither positive nor negative? So what would be done about it? Well, actually, I gave a simplified story. In fact, it's the Hong Kong-Macau-Zhuhai Bridge, and also for visitors or travelers traveling between the two places, and if they are tested positive, then they will have to be sent to the community isolation facility, and the situation will be set out in greater detail in a press release later. In fact, on the 1st of July, with regard to the case involving Sunrise Diagnostics, there was some environmental contamination, but then subsequently that was already cleared. Well, for the 5 staff members, 3 were ward assistants, and one is a nurse, and the other is an occupational therapist. Next, I'm from Mingpao Daily. I'd like to ask the CHP, for those who have to be sent to the isolation facility, and actually Dr. Coleman said that there should be home isolation instead of going to the isolation facility. So what is your take on this? And also for Omicron BA.4 and 0.5, what is the incubation like? How long would it be? And also from the time when the symptoms are developed, and also to the time when they have to be isolated, how long would it take? And also for the triage system at the hospital A&E department, who would be going into the hospital, and how many of them will have to go to the holiday or holding center? And also for the elders who have to be discharged, I'd like to know for how many days an elder from an RCHE would on average be staying in a hospital. Can you tell us? Well, I don't know how many of them will have to go into the quarantine center. With regard to BA.4 and 0.5, if they have already done a PCR test, in other words, once they have got that result within a couple of days, they would immediately get the rapid analysis whether or not it's a suspected BA.4, 0.5, or 0.1, or 0.2, 0.1, 0.12, 0.1, and so on. So if it's a suspected BA.5 or 0.4 or 0.1, 0.12, and so on, then of course they'll be sent to the isolation facility. But then at the time of reporting, or as soon as we receive the report, we will have to look at his home condition. That does not have to wait till after the genome test results. So immediately we'll be able to tell whether or not he will have to go into the center.
For patients arriving at the A&E, we basically check the clinical signs, the important vital signs, such as blood pressure, body temperature, and blood oxygen level. Now, if the patient's condition is not stable, usually we would admit the patient and provide the first-line treatment. When the patient's condition is stable, however, he will be transferred to other wards. As mentioned before, if the patient has received 2 jabs before, and if there is a negative result on the 6th and 7th day, and if there are other reasons, for example, requiring care, the patient would be sent to a holding center for follow-up treatment. Next, English question, please.
Questions from RTHK. So there are almost 3,500 local cases today. So is the CHP foreseeing a further increase in the number of cases? And can you explain again about the Shenzhen Bay port arrangement, and why did the government wait until now to decide to require isolation for those infected, but not a few days ago when people saying they tested positive at the border crossing but had to leave the checkpoint by themselves? And what will the government do for those who reported positive and left in the past few days? Thank you.
I think the case numbers are still increasing, and there's no signs of decreasing at the moment. Most of the people departing from Hong Kong, they have a pre-departure test negative, and they have to undergo another quick PCR test to fulfill the requirement of departure to mainland. So most of them are actually positive cases. Of course, there may be 1 or 2 cases, a few proportion of cases, they may have a recent infection detected there. So to improve and to strengthen the management of these cases will require all departing passengers to be sent to the community isolation facilities for those who are not, who have a positive quick PCR. Yeah.
Next question. This lady, I'm from Hong Kong Economic Times. About the trend of the epidemic situation, how long does it take to reach 10,000 cases a day? And recently, we haven't seen any clusters involving restaurants and workplaces. Has it to do with a change in the criteria by the Center for Health Protection that we no longer detect outbreaks? And about outbound passengers at the Shenzhen Bay port, how many positive cases left the facility on their own? Had it to do with not catching them in time that caused the virus to spread in the community? Is it now that these positive cases were taken to isolation facilities by designated transport or otherwise? For electronic wristbands, for confirmed cases and those under home quarantine, when will the wristbands be distributed? Will there be door-to-door delivery, and how long are they required to wear this wristband? And about the Deputy Director of Health, he just tested positive. How many close contacts are affected? And did you come into contact with the Deputy Director? It's very difficult to predict the caseload. It's just a conjecture, but we always prepare for the worst. As for clusters and outbreaks, we do pay attention. But in light of the rising number of cases, we have yet to identify clusters. If we identify clusters involving more than 10 cases, we will launch an investigation. But in the past few days, we haven't detected any. For those leaving the BCP, the confirmed cases will be sent to a community isolation facility, which means that they'll be taken there by designated transport. I'm sorry. What's the other question you asked? How many confirmed cases left on their own after testing positive at Shenzhen Bay Port? I don't have the exact figure, but I suppose we have a handful of cases every day, and they're required to take point-to-point transport as they leave. For example, after you test positive in the community, if you leave the testing center, you are required to take point-to-point transport, and you need to make your own arrangements. What about the wristbands for the home confinees? I understand that at the moment, wristbands are required for confirmed cases observing home isolation. And the OGO will assist in confirming that these cases can use wristbands, and they will also track the signal. What about the Deputy Director of Health testing positive? I'm not going to comment on individual cases. That's the end of the press briefing. Thank you.